September the 19th, 1944. Arracourt, France. Through the morning fog, Lieutenant Edwin Leiper spotted something that made his blood run cold. A gun muzzle, just 30 feet away. German Panther tank. The most feared armored vehicle in the European theater, with frontal armor so thick it could shrug off hits from nearly every Allied tank gun at any combat range. Its 75 mm high-velocity cannon could punch through American armor from over a mile away, and it was close enough for Leiper to see the rain dripping from its barrel. But Leiper wasn't commanding a Sherman tank. He was in an M18 Hellcat, and in the next 5 minutes, his platoon would do something that would shatter German armored doctrine and rewrite the rules of tank warfare. They would destroy 5 Panthers before the Germans could even turn their turrets to respond. The German tank crews had been skeptical of the Hellcat from the moment they first encountered it. Intelligence reports distributed to Panzer units described it with clinical precision. An American tank destroyer with armor so thin a heavy machine gun could penetrate it. 12 millimeters of steel on the sides, barely half an inch. The turret front was only 25 millimeters, 1 inch. The hull roof was a pathetic 7.9 millimeters, 3/10 of an inch. German tankers, accustomed to their heavily armored Panthers and Tigers, viewed such specifications with something approaching disbelief. The Americans had sent what amounted to a racing car to a tank fight. Based on their doctrine emphasizing protection, German crews would have seen this as madness, the kind of vehicle that might earn dismissive nicknames in the grim humor of Panzer crews. To understand the German mockery, you have to understand German tank doctrine. The Panzer philosophy was built on the concept of the Panzerkampfwagen, the armored fighting vehicle. Not just armored, fighting. The Germans believed in tanks that could dominate the battlefield through the combination of powerful guns and thick armor. The Panther had 80 millimeters of frontal armor sloped at 55 degrees. When angled, it was effectively over 140 millimeters of protection. The Tiger had 100 millimeters of flat frontal plate. These were tanks designed to sit hull down and destroy enemy armor at ranges where return fire couldn't penetrate. German tank commanders were taught to use their superior protection as a tactical advantage. Let the enemy shoot first. Absorb the hit. Then methodically destroy them with your superior gun. This doctrine had worked brilliantly in France, in North Africa, in Russia. German Panzers were the kings of the battlefield, heavily armored, powerfully armed, methodical, deliberate, unstoppable. And then the Americans showed up with the M18 Hellcat, a tank destroyer that violated every principle of German armored warfare. It had armor so thin that testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland revealed a horrifying statistic. When the T-70 prototype was tested as a potential light tank, 9 out of 30 armor-piercing .30 caliber rifle bullets penetrated the side of the turret at just 75 yards. Not anti-tank rounds, not heavy weapons. Regular rifle bullets, the kind any infantryman carried. The German reaction was predictable. They looked at the specifications and concluded the Americans had lost their minds. The Panther weighed 45 tons. The Tiger weighed 57 tons. These were serious tanks. Proper tanks. The M18 weighed 17.7 tons. It was barely heavier than a German half-track. Its armor was so thin that German tank crews joked they could penetrate it with their pistols if they got close enough. Some Panzer commanders reportedly didn't even bother loading armor-piercing rounds when they knew they were facing Hellcats. High explosive shells would do just fine against such a lightly armored target. What the Germans didn't understand was that the Americans weren't trying to build a tank. They were building something entirely different, something that would challenge the fundamental assumptions of armored warfare. The M18 Hellcat was designed around a revolutionary concept. What if armor wasn't the answer? What if speed was? The genesis of the Hellcat began in the chaos of 1940, when German Panzers tore through France with a speed and violence that shocked the world. The fall of France demonstrated that concentrated armor, used aggressively, could achieve breakthrough and encirclement faster than defensive forces could react. The American military establishment watched in horror as French and British forces were simply overwhelmed by the pace of German armored operations. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce studied the German blitzkrieg and drew a radical conclusion. The answer to massed armor wasn't more armor. It was mobility. Bruce envisioned a force of highly mobile tank destroyers that could be held in reserve and rapidly deployed to wherever armor breakthroughs threatened. These vehicles wouldn't need heavy armor because they wouldn't fight like tanks. They would ambush, flank, strike, disappear. Bruce's vision crystallized into the tank destroyer doctrine. Seek, strike, destroy. Tank destroyer units would be organized as independent battalions, held under the control of Corps or Army headquarters. When German Panzers achieved breakthrough, these battalions would race to the threatened sector, establish ambush positions, destroy the enemy armor, and redeploy before German forces could mass against them. Speed wasn't just useful. It was the entire point. The problem was finding a vehicle that could execute this doctrine. The M10 gun motor carriage, built on the M4 Sherman chassis, was too slow. It could manage only 30 miles per hour on roads. It was also too heavy, weighing 29.6 tons. Bruce needed something faster, much faster. Something that could outrun enemy tanks, not just on roads but across country. Something that could redeploy faster than German forces could react. The Ordnance Department's specifications were radical. They wanted a tank destroyer that could reach 50 miles per hour. Most contemporary tanks struggled to reach 25 miles per hour. They wanted it light enough to be air-portable, and they wanted it armed with the new 76 mm gun that was just entering production. The weight limit to achieve these goals was brutal, under 20 tons. Fully loaded. Harley Earl's design studio at Buick Motor Division took on the challenge. Earl was famous for designing sleek, fast automobiles. Now he would design what would become the fastest tracked armored vehicle of World War II. The solution was as elegant as it was terrifying. Strip away every ounce of unnecessary weight. Minimize armor to the absolute bare minimum. Use lightweight aluminum alloys wherever possible. Install the most powerful engine available. The result was the T-70 prototype, which would become the M18 Hellcat. When the first pilot model rolled out of Buick's factory in April 1943, it represented a radical departure from every tank design principle that had dominated armored warfare. The glacis plate, the front armor, was 12.7 millimeters thick, angled at 38 and 64 degrees. The side armor was 12.7 millimeters at 23 degrees. The rear was 12.7 millimeters at 13 degrees. The turret front was 25.4 millimeters at 23 degrees. The turret sides and rear were 12.7 millimeters. To put these numbers in perspective, the M4 Sherman had 51 millimeters of frontal armor. The German Panzer IV had 80 millimeters. The Panther had 80 millimeters at a much steeper angle. The Tiger had 100 millimeters. The M18 had armor that was barely 1/4 the thickness of its contemporaries. It was, by every measure, defenseless against anything larger than a heavy machine gun. The open-top turret made things worse. Like all American tank destroyers, the M18's turret had no roof. The crew compartment was exposed to the sky. This design choice saved weight and provided excellent visibility, but it left the 5-man crew vulnerable to snipers, grenades, artillery fragments, and anything else that could fall into the fighting compartment. German infantry quickly learned that you didn't need an anti-tank weapon to kill a Hellcat crew. A well-thrown grenade would do just fine. The vulnerability was so extreme that some American units initially refused to believe the M18 was meant for frontline combat. When the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion first received their Hellcats in July 1944, some crews thought they were training vehicles. Surely the Army wouldn't send them into combat against Panthers and Tigers in something with less armor than a scout car. But the 704th was told to prepare for deployment to France. The M18 was going to war, naked, exposed, defenseless. But the M18 had something no German tank could match. The Continental R975C1 radial engine, a 9-cylinder air-cooled power plant originally designed for aircraft, generated 460 horsepower. In a 17.7-ton vehicle, this created a power-to-weight ratio that was simply staggering. The M18 could accelerate from a standstill to 30 miles per hour in under 20 seconds. Its top speed on roads was 55 miles per hour. Off-road, it could maintain 26 miles per hour across terrain that would slow a Sherman to a crawl. But raw speed was only part of the equation. The M18 featured the revolutionary Torque-matic automatic transmission. Previous tank transmissions were manual, requiring the driver to shift gears, which meant momentary losses of power and speed during gear changes. The Torque-matic eliminated this. Power delivery was continuous, smooth. The M18 could accelerate without interruption, maintaining momentum in a way that left German tank crews stunned. The torsion bar suspension, another innovation, gave the M18 a ride quality unlike any tracked vehicle of the era. Where Shermans and German tanks jolted and bounced over rough terrain, the M18 glided. This wasn't just about crew comfort. It meant the gunner could maintain sight picture while moving. The 76mm gun could be fired accurately on the move, something that was nearly impossible in most World War II tanks. The M18 could also reverse at 26 miles per hour, nearly as fast as it could go forward. This was crucial for the shoot-and-scoot tactics the Hellcat was designed for. Most tanks of the era could reverse at maybe 5 or 10 miles per hour, which meant that once you committed to a firing position, extraction was slow and dangerous. The M18 could fire, then disappear backwards into cover before enemy crews could even identify the threat. German after-action reports from Normandy onwards repeatedly mentioned American tank destroyers that would fire a few shots and then vanish as if they had never been there. The 76mm M1 gun gave the Hellcat teeth to match its speed. While it couldn't penetrate the frontal armor of Panthers or Tigers at range, it was more than adequate against side and rear armor. The M62 armor-piercing capped ballistic cap round could penetrate 88 millimeters of armor at 1,000 yards. The Panthers' side armor was 40 to 45 millimeters. The Tiger's side armor was 80 millimeters. From the flank, the Hellcat could kill any German tank it encountered. When high-velocity, armor-piercing rounds became available in late 1944, the Hellcat gained the ability to engage even frontal armor under certain conditions. The HVAP ammunition could theoretically penetrate the Panther's turret front at about 1,000 yards, though this ammunition was always in short supply and carefully rationed. Most Hellcat crews never saw it. The German High Command's assessment of the M18 was dismissive. Intelligence reports described it as a lightly armored reconnaissance vehicle, not a serious threat to German armor. Panzer crews were told the Hellcat was easy to destroy. Just hit it anywhere with anything. Its thin armor meant even a near miss from high-explosive shells could cripple it through blast effect alone. What the Germans failed to understand was that you had to hit the Hellcat first, and that was proving to be almost impossible. The first major test of the M18 came at Arracourt in September 1944, and it would become the defining moment that validated the entire tank-destroyer doctrine. General George S. Patton's Third Army had been advancing rapidly across France following the breakout from Normandy. By mid-September, his forces had reached the Moselle River in northeastern France. The German High Command, desperate to halt Patton's advance, ordered a major counter-offensive. The German 5th Panzer Army, under General Hasso von Manteuffel, was to strike at Patton's exposed flank near the town of Arracourt. The attacking force included the 113th Panzer Brigade and elements of the 11th Panzer Division, equipped with the latest Panther tanks. These were the best tanks Germany could field, with combat-experienced crews who had survived the Eastern Front. The Germans were confident. American tanks had proven vulnerable to Panthers throughout the campaign. This would be another German victory. September the 19th dawned with heavy fog blanketing the rolling hills around Arracourt. Visibility was measured in yards, not miles. Perfect weather for an armored assault, the Germans thought. The fog would negate American air superiority and allow German armor to close with American positions before being detected. The Panthers of the 113th Panzer Brigade advanced through the murk toward the village of Rechicourt-la-Petite. But the Americans were waiting. Company C of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the 4th Armored Division's Combat Command A, had established positions on Hill 246, approximately 800 yards from Rechicourt-la-Petite. Lieutenant Edwin Leiper's platoon of 4 M18 Hellcats was in overwatch, engines running, ready to move. The fog was thick enough that they could barely see 100 feet. Then, through the grey murk, Leiper saw it. A gun muzzle. Close. Too close. The German Panther had emerged from the woods at the base of Hill 246, advancing slowly, its commander likely relying on his superior armor to protect him if he stumbled into American forces. Standard German doctrine. The Panther commander probably wasn't even particularly worried. His frontal armor was impenetrable to most American weapons. Even if he encountered American tanks, his 75 mm gun would make short work of them at this range. Sergeant Stacy, commanding the lead Hellcat, opened fire first. The 76 mm gun cracked. The armor-piercing round struck the Panther's side armor. Penetration. The German tank shuddered and stopped, smoke beginning to pour from the engine deck. 5 seconds. 1 kill. Before the German column could react, Stacy's Hellcat fired again. Another Panther materialized out of the fog, and another 76 mm round found its mark. 2 kills. 10 seconds elapsed. Now the Germans realized they were in an ambush, but they couldn't see their attackers clearly. The Hellcats on Hill 246 were partially concealed in a depression, and the fog reduced them to vague silhouettes. The German commander attempted to orient his remaining tanks, but through the dense fog, identifying targets was nearly impossible. More Hellcats opened up. The 76 mm guns fired as fast as their loaders could chamber rounds. Panthers began burning in the fog. The German column, caught in the ambush, struggled to locate their attackers. Then, German return fire found its mark. A round struck Sergeant Stacy's Hellcat, wounding the crew. The thin armor offered little protection, but the vehicle remained mobile enough to withdraw. Stacy pulled back toward Arracourt, but the engagement was far from over. Leiper repositioned one of his remaining Hellcats and destroyed 2 more German tanks. But the Germans, now oriented on the American positions, struck back. 2 more of Leiper's Hellcats were destroyed in quick succession. Leiper withdrew toward Arracourt with his sole remaining M18. By the time this initial engagement concluded, the results told a complex story. 5 German tanks destroyed in those first 5 minutes, with additional kills following, but 3 of the 4 American Hellcats had been knocked out. The cost was real. Yet the German attack toward Arracourt had been disrupted before it could gain momentum. Over the next 3 days, the Battle of Arracourt would become a masterclass in how mobility could challenge superior armor. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion's Hellcats, working alongside the 4th Armored Division's Shermans, used the terrain expertly. They would establish firing positions, wait for German armor to advance into range, engage from the flanks, and then rapidly redeploy before German forces could organize effective responses. Company C's actions under Captain Tom Evans demonstrated the tactical potential of coordinated Hellcat operations. Throughout the engagement at Rechicourt-la-Petite and surrounding areas, Lieutenant Leiper's platoon and other elements of Company C destroyed 15 German tanks, the majority Panthers. Sergeant Henry R. Hartman alone was credited with 6 kills, most achieved by exploiting the Hellcat's speed to flank German positions before their turrets could traverse to engage him. The broader battle tactics evolved rapidly. Evans used his Hellcats in coordinated ambushes. The lead platoon would engage German tanks from visible positions, attracting attention and return fire. While the Germans focused on the obvious threat, other Hellcat platoons would race across country at speeds approaching 40 miles per hour, swinging around to hit the Panthers from flanks or rear. By the time German tank commanders realized they were being flanked, it was often too late. The German commanders were experiencing something that challenged their tactical assumptions. Their entire playbook was built around the premise that tanks fought relatively deliberate engagements. You identified enemy armor at range. You maneuvered to present your strongest armor while threatening the enemy's weakest. You exchanged fire until one side was destroyed or withdrew. This was tank warfare, as Germany had practiced it from Poland to Kursk. But the Hellcats were operating by different rules entirely. They treated the battlefield not as a series of defensive positions, but as a fluid space where speed created opportunities. German Panthers would advance into positions at their typical pace, establish their firing positions with the expectation of using their superior armor, and then discover that the Hellcats they thought were in front of them had repositioned, beside them, behind them, or vanished entirely. The psychological effect was disorienting. What made this particularly challenging for German crews was their tanks' turret traverse limitations. The Panther's hydraulic turret traverse system was variable, dependent on engine RPM. At the Panther's governed maximum of 2,500 revolutions per minute, the turret could complete a full 360-degree rotation in approximately 18 seconds, reasonably competitive. But few Panther commanders ran their engines at maximum RPM during combat operations. The Maybach engines were temperamental, prone to transmission and final drive failures that plagued the Panther throughout its service life. Running at high RPM accelerated mechanical wear. At lower engine speeds, which were far more common during actual combat, turret traverse slowed dramatically. At 1,000 RPM, a typical combat idle, the Panther's turret required 93 seconds for a complete rotation, more than a minute and a half. During that time, a Hellcat could cover hundreds of yards, completely changing its position and angle of attack. The Tiger I was even worse. Its turret required 60 seconds for a full rotation at high engine speed, and could take up to 6 minutes at low speeds. The Tiger II's turret traverse was slightly better at 19 seconds maximum, but again, this required high engine RPM that German crews were often reluctant to maintain due to mechanical reliability concerns and fuel shortages. Compare this to the M18 Hellcat. Its fully traversable turret could complete a 360-degree rotation in approximately 10 to 12 seconds, and this speed wasn't dependent on engine RPM. The Hellcat's turret traverse was powered by its own dedicated system. More importantly, because the M18 was so light and maneuverable, the entire vehicle could be pivoted rapidly using differential steering. Hellcat crews learned to use the vehicle's mobility itself as a form of turret traverse, spinning the entire tank to bring the gun on target faster than adjusting turret position alone. Sergeant Henry R. Hartmann's 6 confirmed kills during the Battle of Arracourt demonstrate how effectively trained crews could leverage the M18's advantages. Reports indicate Hartmann engaged German Panthers that were attempting to flank American positions. The tactical pattern that emerged from such engagements was consistent. The Hellcat would close rapidly to effective range, often 600 yards or less, before German crews could fully orient on the threat. German Panthers, attempting to traverse their turrets to engage, would find themselves outpaced by the M18's combination of vehicle maneuverability and turret traverse. Hartmann's crew could pivot the entire vehicle using differential steering while simultaneously traversing the turret, bringing the 76 mm gun to bear on Panther side armor before the Germans could complete their own turret traverse. The pattern repeated. Engage the flank, fire, then use the Hellcat's superior speed to reposition before the German formation could coordinate a response. German tank commanders found themselves facing impossible tactical choices. If they maintained high engine RPM to ensure fast turret traverse, they consumed precious fuel and increased the risk of mechanical breakdown. The Panther, despite its formidable combat capabilities, suffered from chronic reliability problems. High engine speeds accelerated wear on components that were already prone to failure. But if they ran their engines at lower speeds to preserve mechanical reliability and conserve fuel, their turrets traversed so slowly that they became vulnerable to precisely the kind of flanking attacks the Hellcats specialized in. This tactical dilemma represented a fundamental challenge to German armored doctrine. Panthers and Tigers were designed to dominate through the combination of firepower and protection, fighting deliberate engagements where their superior armor would absorb enemy fire, while their powerful guns destroyed opponents. The Hellcats' speed-based tactics bypassed this entire tactical framework, creating situations where German armor advantages became largely irrelevant. The psychological impact on German Panzer crews was significant. The M18 forced German tank commanders to adapt their tactics in ways that ran counter to their training. The need for constant, all-around security, the pressure to maintain high engine speeds despite reliability concerns, the inability to rely on frontal armor as the primary defensive measure. All of these represented departures from established German armored doctrine. The Hellcat had achieved something remarkable. It had forced the Germans to fight on American terms. German tanks that were designed to dominate through firepower and protection found themselves in a conflict where neither advantage could be consistently employed. The M18 speed created a new tactical dynamic where German armor superiority became situational rather than absolute. By September the 22nd, when the Battle of Arracourt concluded, the results spoke volumes. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had destroyed 39 German tanks, predominantly Panthers. The battalion's losses: 4 M18s destroyed and 3 damaged. The exchange ratio heavily favored the Americans despite the Hellcats' paper-thin armor. The speed that American designers had purchased by sacrificing protection had proven to be a form of protection itself, active rather than passive. The Arracourt engagement wasn't an isolated success. Throughout the fall and winter of 1944, M18 units accumulated impressive combat records. The 630th Tank Destroyer Battalion reported 53 German tanks destroyed during operations in July and August 1944, with 17 M18s lost. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion played a critical role during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, when 4 Hellcats attached to Team de Sobry helped defend Novel north of Bastogne. Facing elements of the 2nd Panzer Division, these Hellcats used speed-based hit-and-run tactics to slow the German advance, buying crucial time for American forces to establish Bastogne's defense. The overall statistics for the M18 in World War II are noteworthy. Total enemy armor kills claimed reached 526, 498 in Europe, 17 in Italy, and 11 in the Pacific. The M18 achieved a kill-to-loss ratio of 2.3 to 1 in Europe and 2.4 to 1 overall, the highest of any American tank or tank destroyer fielded in the war. For every Hellcat destroyed, American crews claimed more than 2 German armored vehicles destroyed. These figures gain additional significance when considering the armor disparity. German Panthers and Tigers possessed armor 3 to 4 times thicker than the M18. Their guns could destroy Hellcats at virtually any range, from any angle. By conventional metrics of tank combat effectiveness, armor thickness, gun power, survivability, and direct engagement, German armor should have dominated. Yet the statistics suggest otherwise. The M18's speed, agility, and the tactics these capabilities enabled proved in many circumstances more valuable than heavy armor. The tank destroyer doctrine, as originally conceived, mobile reserves concentrating rapidly against armored breakthroughs, was rarely implemented as envisioned. Tank destroyer battalions were typically parceled out to infantry divisions for direct fire support rather than held as mobile anti-armor forces. Yet the M18 itself validated a crucial principle. Properly employed mobility could substitute for armor protection. Hellcat crews survived not through thick steel, but through speed, tactical positioning, and the ability to dictate engagement terms. The doctrinal implications would resonate for decades. The M18 demonstrated that lightly armored vehicles with superior mobility could, under proper tactical employment, defeat heavily armored opponents. This concept influenced Cold War tank destroyer designs, light armored vehicles in mechanized infantry roles, and the continuing emphasis on mobility in contemporary armored warfare doctrine. The M18 Hellcat's legacy extends beyond its combat record. It represented a fundamental philosophical shift in how to approach armored warfare. For decades, tank design had been dominated by the endless race between guns and armor. Thicker armor led to more powerful guns, which led to even thicker armor in a spiral that produced vehicles like the German Tiger II, which weighed 68 tons and was so mechanically unreliable it often broke down before reaching the battlefield. The M18 suggested an alternative path. Instead of trying to make your armor thick enough to resist enemy fire, make your vehicle fast enough that enemy fire couldn't hit you in the first place. This philosophy had its limits, of course. The M18's thin armor meant that when it was hit, the results were usually catastrophic. Crew casualties were high when Hellcats were destroyed. The open-top turret meant the crew was vulnerable to artillery and infantry fire in ways that fully enclosed vehicles were not. And the 76 mm gun, while adequate against side and rear armor, struggled against the frontal armor of late-war German designs. The M18 was not a perfect vehicle, but it proved that armor wasn't everything. In the final analysis, German skepticism toward the Hellcats' thin armor was understandable given their doctrine emphasizing protection. Armor alone doesn't win battles. Firepower alone doesn't win battles. Mobility, properly employed, can be the decisive factor. The German Panzers were formidable machines, engineering achievements that reflected years of armored warfare experience. But by 1944, they were increasingly constrained by weight, mechanical complexity, and Germany's dwindling fuel supplies. The M18 Hellcat was fast, light, and purpose-built for a specific tactical doctrine. It sacrificed conventional protection for unconventional survivability through speed. In the hands of well-trained American crews who understood how to leverage that speed, it proved highly effective against armor that conventional analysis suggested should have been invulnerable. German crews who initially dismissed the M18's capabilities based on armor thickness alone discovered that turret traverse speed and vehicle mobility could matter more than steel plate in determining combat outcomes. The Hellcat proved what military theorists have understood since ancient times. It doesn't matter how thick your armor is if the enemy can simply go around it. Speed creates options. Mobility creates opportunities. And sometimes the best defense isn't steel plate at all. It's the ability to be somewhere else before your enemy can pull the trigger. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the M18 Hellcat's revolutionary approach to tank warfare, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Warline for more in-depth documentary-style content about the innovations, tactics, and human stories that shaped World War II. We're just getting started uncovering the technological surprises that changed history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.